On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, it's Toxic Positivity Friday, yes, but there's nothing toxic about talking about our dear pals, Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, January the 31st, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. You can also find the show on Instagram, and you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. Link in the description of the podcast. It's free to join. It's a great place. Come hang out, talk ball with sickos just like you who love the podcast. Of course, you can subscribe for free to the daily Locked On Raptors newsletter as well. You can go to the QR code on the screen or the link in the description of the podcast if you're not watching on YouTube, and you can go subscribe. Just drop your email in the bar, and every single day you'll get fresh, piping hot emails to your inbox for free from me, right? Write about the Raptors 5 days a week. Katie Heindl writes about the NBA 4 days a week. You get Michael Shearer on Thursdays talking basketball poetry with his beautiful breakdowns. Josh Lloyd fantasy tips, the whole 9 yards. It's a great value proposition because it costs you nothing except your email in a bar. So please go and do that. Thank you very much. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. The new customers can bet $5 and win $200 in bonus bets if you win that bet. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. We'll get started here on your Friday edition of the show with Katie Heindl, Grand Poobah of the Locked On NBA newsletter family, our national editor and fearless leader, here to talk about a wonderful piece of team-created content. The Open Gym episode starring Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, which dropped this week. If you haven't watched it yet, pause the show, go watch it, and then come back because we're going to talk all about it today and just kind of dig into all the nooks and crannies of this thing, the thing that we liked, the things that made us feel, the things that made us remember things that we are happy to have remembered. It's going to be very fun, and it's never a bad time talking about Kyle and DeMar, and it will be a very classic Sean and Katie episode, I think, as we talk about our faves and get into our feelings and all of that stuff. Katie Heindl, how the hell are you?
I'm well. I'm excited to talk about this.
Me too. I'm thrilled that we could line this one up today. Let's just kind of get into it. We don't have as much structure for this one as we usually would. We'll get, I think, at the end into sort of some of the stuff they talked about at the end of this episode, sort of parlaying the Kyle DeMar thing into the future. But off the top, I just kind of want to get your broad takeaways, your feelings. What were the things that you liked most about this Kyle DeMar reunion? They got him on a couch in Sacramento in late 2024. Great work. Like the logistics, I'm sure, were a headache for the Open Gym crew. We love them for it. What were your sort of overall impressions of watching these two dudes reminisce about a really, really fun past?
I really liked that they wanted to clear up like off the bat the fact that this rumor, not rumor, but like I think how we've all reported it, that they didn't like each other at first.
Right.
They really seemed to want to backpedal, and we're like, let's get this out of the way. Like, it's not that we didn't like each other. We just didn't really talk. Like, we didn't really have a friendship or a relationship beyond being teammates, which I actually think is pretty important for the way that like sets the tone for the rest of chronicling their history, but also what that team became, because I think that was also one of my favorite parts of just like the emphasis of like, what is the difference of a teammate and then a friend? And then what is the importance in terms of team building on having guys that, like you trust and you play well with, and there's like some on-court chemistry, but this idea of family and brotherhood that I think we hear used a lot. And I like that they said, like, you hear it a lot in pregame scrums, like you'll break on family, but that neither of them felt it as much as they did with the Raptors. So I think that is a through line, starting with a bit of a riff and like a joke felt very true to them. But then that is a through line kind of leading to almost like the entirety of those teams that they led,
Totally.
I like that.
Yeah, like that whole era, it really did. I think Dwayne Casey, shout out Dwayne, he makes an appearance in this thing. Lovely to see him with his Dwayne Caseyisms and all that. Like it did feel like that it was almost like a directive from like the top down of like, hey, like this is we're together in this. And, they were all like, most of the guys were young fathers at the time. And it just really did feel like this really joyful communal energy within that team. And like new guys would come in and they'd be sort of ingratiated into it as well. It was beautiful. And like, I think that was my sort of overall takeaway from watching this too, is just how special that whole era was. And you probably didn't appreciate it properly in the time if you were a fan, just because, hey, like they're winning games. This is great. This is going to continue forever. And obviously I think now 5-6 years from the title and sort of everything that went down, it does feel like it's easier to appreciate how incredible it was. And it also feels way less replicable than it maybe felt like at the end of the run. Like, oh, they'll just do it again, right? They'll just run it back. Like, no, like they kind of caught lightning in a bottle there. They had this sort of right mix of personalities at the right time. And I think it's super enviable and probably something we're never going to see again. Like, I think it's having that kind of dynamic, that kind of, the two guys who kind of led everything, but everything around it kind of coalescing in sort of their image. Like that's as rare as winning a championship, I think. And I think people should appreciate that. Even though DeMar wasn't on the team that ultimately won the championship, the run that led up to the championship is as special, as much a part of the fabric of the franchise as actually winning the thing. And I have a lot of time for if you prefer that sort of era. And if you would like not trade off those 5 years for the championship year, I know that's sacrilege in the rings culture we live in, but I think that's a totally fair stance if you preferred to watch those 5 years over the championship season. Like it's a special thing they were able to achieve there.
Well, I think it does a really good job of also showing that you don't get to the title without DeMar and you don't get to the title without DeMar. Like obviously in the obvious piece of the trade, but I also think in the work that the two of them did to build the team up to what it was, like that was so clear. Which I think also, I mean, we know by now. I mean, I think if you're an empathetic person and through the history and the retelling and DeMar's been candid about it, Masai's been candid about it, but just like it also adds another layer to, I think, the hurt that he obviously felt in being traded, because it's like you did everything to get the team to a position where they could trade for a Kawhi Leonard, and then they could go on to instantly win, right? But the sort of countless nights and seasons before that, where he put the team on his back, and they achieved what they were able to do because of that. I really liked a young Amir Johnson, a lot of them young Amir Johnson appearances. Why didn't they talk to Amir? Maybe just like a scheduling thing. Anyway, I really liked these are just like offhands, but I really liked the Pat Patterson movie nights that they talked about having. Like, I think it was just very interesting in a way to see all the nuances of that team, like young Valanciunas, and like all those fits were so specific, but they were all like, no one was more. Yes, maybe some guys were more important than others, but it seemed like everyone on those rosters had a lot of room to grow and to be themselves, which again is like a very rare thing. And to your point, I think it was so bittersweet watching it, because you're like, wow, this was amazing, and they were able to do it, and you're like, wow, this was amazing, and they'll never be able to do this again. Like in quite this way, right? Like that was the uniqueness of it.
Yeah, and I mean, look, this is going to sound like a boomer ass take probably, but I don't know if the sort of environment of the current NBA really even allows for that kind of thing anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like the sort of roster turnover and the constant sort of need to optimize every dollar on your cap sheet and all of that. Like it just, if Kyle Lowry were making $50 million during this run, or DeMar DeRozan making $50 million during this run, like it probably changes the dynamics of it all and doesn't give the runway for those two guys to build the bond they did, and that team to kind of build that year over year stability they did. And, I hope that's not the case. I hope we see this sort of period we're in now where everything feels very crunched financially kind of change and kind of gives teams runway to keep things together longer. But at the moment, that's going to be tough for teams, and that's a real bummer. And it makes me even more sort of thankful and happy that we got to see it when we did. before the CBA ruined everything. We're going to come back on the other side, Katie, and continue to just run through some of our favorite moments. We got to talk about Scott Pilgrim versus the world, I guess. And we also have to talk about Kyle and DeMar just being hotel room buddies like kids at a travel hockey tournament growing up. We're going to get into that coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at TurboTax. And I've talked about my taxes on this podcast before. I don't like doing my taxes. I'm a freelancer. I have been for my entire adult life. And every year around this time, I have this pit in my stomach thinking, oh, God, I got to tally up all my expenses. I got to figure out what I owe. I got to, put money aside because I make American money. And it's all a mess. It's a total disaster. But TurboTax is the way that I can go and not worry whatsoever, because taxes are finding a TurboTax expert who can do my taxes for me as soon as today. What a wonderful thing. An expert who will give my taxes their undivided attention as they work on my return while I get real-time updates on their progress. It's a wonderful thing. I can focus on my day. Don't have to worry about all of the stress that comes with doing my taxes. And again, they're just going to try to get you the absolute best return possible, knowing every single deductions, every single form you got to fill out. It's fantastic. This is how taxes should be. Get an expert now at turbotax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. Back out here with Katie Heindl talking about feelings and stuff as we go through the Open Gym episode featuring Kyle, Lowry, and DeMar DeRozan. Any other sort of favorite little bits? I mean, there was some revelatory stuff I think we can maybe get into regarding the sort of post Rudy Gay trade road trip. That was, I think, some pretty interesting stuff, right?
Poor Rudy, though.
Poor Rudy, yeah.
And like, to be fair, they're all friends with him. They're all
Kyle
good.
was in Rudy's wedding and is the godfather of his child. Yeah,
they're all very good friends with him. But when I feel like he got the short end of the stick when Dwayne Casey was just like, no shade on Rudy, but wow, they really had to trade that guy. And that's when it all came together.
Yeah, it was very blunt. It was a basketball fit thing, surely not a get this toxic man out of here, for sure. But definitely, yeah, Rudy Gay catching some strays, poor guy.
Yeah. But the trade. Yeah. The trade itself and the fact that they were on this road trip that, it was interesting to me to hear neither of them was sure they'd be around very long after the team got back from that road trip, after the Rudy Gay trade. So I think just this like formative experience of like, okay, now we have this maybe short runway to show what we want to do here as leaders, and then also what we want to do with this team, and I think that's a challenge that could be pretty overwhelming. But I think, again, like, if we want to talk about conditions sort of being Goldilocks, like just right, I think the Raptors being a team at that point that was, it's safe to say, fairly under the radar, gave a lot
just a little,
just a touch, gave a lot of room for them to do that. And, to the lower stakes, the front office wanted to make some moves, but again, like, they're not in a position where they can really make huge ones. They see the performance of, Kyle and DeMar over that stretch, like playing pretty well together. DeMar's got a lot more space to kind of roam around without Rudy. He's got the ball in his hands a lot more. I feel like there was probably a sense of like, oh, let's like give this a little bit more time and see what it is these guys can do. And again, like, that is one of those things where if that didn't happen, or if maybe one or both of them decided like, I'm not really up to this task, or like, I don't know that I want to do this here for this franchise. None of this would have happened.
Yeah, I thought it really sort of builds the mystique of DeMar being such a Toronto guy, where he talks about in that road trip, he kind of just has a conversation with Kyle, like, all right, it's us now, we got to do this. And I'm not trying to get traded somewhere else. Like, I just want to be here. Yeah. So help me do this, please. And I think you could probably fairly say Kyle was maybe, the guy who had more one foot out the door than DeMar at that time. I mean, they almost traded him to the Knicks. We know how that all fell apart. Thanks, James Dolan, for being afraid. But yeah, it's I think it adds to, I mean, that season's incredible, right? Like 2013-14 is one of probably like my 3 favorite Raptors seasons of all time. You got the championship season's its own kind of thing, but the regular season was kind of miserable. But you've got like the title defense season, I think, is kind of unassailable as number 1. It was beautiful and wonderful, and like it's a shame it got cut short, but there's also some weird sort of interesting story notes to the fact that it did get cut short. I don't know. Maybe that's cope. Who knows? There's also the 2017-18 year where they go and win 59 games and DeMar's unbelievable. But 2013-14, turning things around and sort of avoiding the tank and setting the stage for what was to come. That's right up there. And it only adds to the lore of that season to know that those 2 guys kind of like their connection was really forged after that trade. And, the sort of what was going on behind the scenes was those 2 dudes just being like, all right, like, let's do this thing now. And that's great. Again, like it's maybe not something that today where the sort of impetus to rebuild and retool and trade guys who aren't tied down is so like prevalent across most front offices. It's one of the reasons I still really appreciate the Raptors front office, even though it gets themselves into trouble sometimes, right? Like they had this issue with Siakam and Fred and OG where maybe they hung on quote unquote too long, but I don't know. I think doing that in the hopes that you can kind of recapture the magic of 2013-14, there are worse ways to kind of get yourself into trouble. I think it's kind of admirable, honestly. Any other stuff that popped to you from this doc?
Yeah, I think the personality development was really interesting because like we do know DeMar to be the kind of more like stoic leader and, Kyle to be the goofier one, or maybe to show a little bit more of his emotions on the floor. And like usually again, like for his teammates, not necessarily for himself. But I thought it was really interesting in all these sort of like, and one just completely separately, it always fascinates me how much athletes can remember exact plays.
Crazy.
And moments.
It's bonkers.
Just by like one or 2 referential words, you know what I mean? And they did that so many times. It was like, wow. Anyway, when they were talking about some of those, it was that Kyle, right before the play happened or the shot happened, would tell DeMar, like, when you make this shot, don't react, like, or act like you the shot all the time.
Yeah.
Or when you do this, do this. And I thought like that kind of coaching, like personality coaching almost, is really interesting because you're also like, you're doing this to like help boost and create someone else's lore, which I think we know, in the NBA is a really important thing. It's important for all athletes, but in the NBA, I think even more when like, yeah, these guys are all on teams, but with the way like autonomy is gone, like they're also their own.
Totally.
Individualized. I don't want to say brand, just like individualized.
Say it, Katie. Say it.
Because I think this shows it's much more than that, right? And I think to a degree, 100%. It also showed like that was such an important part of building DeMar's entire like personality and his confidence from this like shy kid who never left Compton, California, to be drafted by a team in a different country across the continent, and like all the, I don't know. It actually. That was very cool. And then in general, I just felt even sadder for DeMar. Like it really hit home to me how much he wanted to be a one team player for his whole career. And he wanted that team to be Toronto. So
there may never be someone like that again. This is the Toronto Raptors. It's a remarkable thing that was ever a thing. Shout out to DeMar. Yeah. The other stuff I like too, I mean, I talked about it a little bit going into the break, the like the hotel room stuff. I mean, this was never a team that was necessarily like the partiest team, right? Like, I don't think that was ever kind of a through line of their guy. They were all kind of, again, older, had kids and stuff like that. But the idea of like them being in like Atlanta, the city where everyone goes out and being like, yeah, we're not going to go out. We're just going to like hang out in each other's rooms and watch movies and watch basketball and eat junk food. Like, hell yeah. That's how I hang out with my friends. They're just like me, Kate.
I did like that. I also just liked when they were like, we would just sit in each other's rooms and not necessarily say anything. Like that's also a nice sign of a true friendship and someone you're just like around all the time. Totally. And you're so comfortable, in their presence that basically like you don't need conversation. Like you're so like attuned to their body language and their moods, and I think that showed like it was pretty crucial in it. I am glad, despite what I did text you about, and I saw in one of the teasers that Nick Nurse was not in
Yeah.
it. I guess
I mean,
he walked
yeah.
in during the interview at some
Yeah.
point, which makes sense. He's the Sixers coach, and they were there, so
Mhm.
I'm glad. But I was like, I think aside from some names we mentioned that we would have liked to hear from,
Mhm.
I'm okay with not hearing from Nick on this
Yeah,
one.
I know he was there as an assistant the whole time, but that's fine. He's in the background. Assistants aren't supposed to talk to the media anyway. Yeah, I mean, Jonas Valanciunas would have been nice. He would have been
Jonas would have been
a fun
nice.
guy, but
Mark would have been nice. Serge
busy
would have
being
been
sad for
actually
the
like,
Wizards.
yeah, everyone. And I'm also glad they didn't show. I'm glad they didn't show because we see this all the time.
Hmm.
And it's like a moth to a flame for me. Like I cannot look away. But that missed shot in the Nets series,
Yeah, like
I was like
the Paul Pierce
bracing
block. Yeah.
myself. I'm like, I know that that's
Mhm.
coming, but it did not.
Yeah, they just skipped through that. They skipped through the
Thank
Wizards
God.
sweep. Loved it.
Thank God.
They went through road trip. We're in the conference finals now. Great.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Thoughts on this being an affection of Kyle Lowry's, apparently, where he just wanted to watch it all the
Never
time.
seen it. Probably never gonna watch it. Did
Fun
not
movie.
realize that was the movie they were talking about. Was actually waiting for them to say the name of the movie. So I guess I just completely blanked on that part.
Yeah, they mentioned it very quickly.
Okay.
But I mean, one of the Torontoist movies there is. It's
true.
an extremely Toronto movie, which I think is very cool as well. Good. I mean, fun that Kyle has like weird sort of niche tastes like that. I'm into it.
It's like when Amir did the zombie walk. You're like,
Yeah.
you're getting invested in the city in your own weird way. Kudos.
We'll come back on the other side, Katie, and finish up our thoughts here on the Kyle DeMar Open Gym episode and maybe bring their relationship into the future a little bit. We'll do that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets, and as the game unfolds, feel the thrill from kickoff to final whistle. I'm not a football fan. I don't really care about the Chiefs or the Eagles, but if I'm at like a Super Bowl party, it's fun to get in on the action a little bit. Maybe you kind of bet with some friends. It's always a good time. You can go peruse the FanDuel app, even if you're not a football fan, even in the slightest, and have yourself a good time during the Super Bowl. Plus, you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. If you win that bet, that's icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Just bet $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Wrapping it up here with Katie Heindl as we put a bow on our thoughts on the Kyle Lowry DeMar DeRozan Open Gym episode. And I want to talk about it a little bit in the context of the current team, Katie. They kind of they didn't do like a direct connection necessarily from the past to the future. I think it's really interesting and fun that RJ Barrett is like so clearly a child of the Kyle DeMar era. Like, the Vince stuff, he was, very, very young when that all happened. Like Kyle and DeMar, like that, he's like part of the wave where that was his team. That was that age group's team. And very cool to see him now on the team trying to kind of, carry the torch, if we're going to be corny about it. And I think, it's sort of interesting to think about it within the context of the team right now, Katie, because they're winning after having lost a whole bunch. Now, the team that traded Rudy Gay was, I think, 9-15, not 9-31, as the Raptors were at one point this year. But they're on the win streak. They've won 7 of 8. And I do think the sort of, there's a lot of hand-wringing about the tank and, ruining lottery odds. I'm not worried about it personally. I think people who listen to this show know that's not a thing I would get worried about. But I do think it's kind of interesting to think about it through the lens of what the power of winning can be for forging those types of relationships and connections, right? Like, I think, if Kyle and DeMar don't go and win a whole bunch of games that year, it probably never transpires the way that it did. And, it's possible that they win a bunch of games and things don't work out anyway. But like, I just think winning's good, Katie. Winning's good for vibes. Winning's good for friendship. Am I crazy in saying this? And like, is that to you like something that is worth considering here as they do tank calculus going into the deadline and beyond? Like, do you really want to mess up a thing like this if it could potentially kind of portend similar relationship ties down the line? Maybe this is a stretch, but I think it's a real thing. We're talking about humans here.
Yeah, I mean, I will disagree with you slightly in that I didn't really like that they did that at the end of the episode.
Sure.
I
No,
was like, this could have been standalone. I know why they did it for storytelling purposes and to like tie things back in your 30th anniversary season to the team that there is now. And like everything can't be based in nostalgia. I do think it could have just been a standalone.
I totally agree. Yes.
But I did find it, I did really like that, as you said, RJ was so immersed in that team. It made me realize like, oh yeah, like we, I think we as people living in Toronto who lived through that and fans of the team talk so, like hallowedly about that team for good reason, but you maybe forget the farther reaching impacts of that, especially that it could have on now like a current player's career. But yeah, to your point about chemistry, and I think we've talked about this all season, like even in the maybe gloomier parts of the season so far, you don't necessarily want to tinker with something where you've seen the best parts of it and you have a pretty clear sense of what that could be. I think the things I've enjoyed the most this season is when the team gets to really like be themselves and do the goofy TikToks and do the dances after the win and have these like really funny and over the like the chain and the crown now, like to have these sort of incentivizations that, it's a young team. And I think it's not a terrible or like blasphemous thing to play to the interests and like of that young team. Like they don't have to be stoic, and just like unemotional all the time. Like they're young guys, and these are the things that I think are going to spark them and be able to create that camaraderie and hopefully a deeper chemistry like you see with Kyle and DeMar, right? Like definitely there were, I think like you saw how different, I guess, like the internal workings of the team was with Kyle and DeMar and how it is now. And I think, again, this is a boomer take, but I think that goes to just like the way that being in the league has changed, and I think guys being a bit more isolated, whether that's because social media, contracts, whatever, I think these opportunities for togetherness or like to knit together as a team are actually much rarer than they were at that time because of all this like outside pressure and influence. So again, yeah, that does certainly speak to letting them be themselves like this season, right? Like it is a low stakes season. Regardless of if you want to tank or if you want to win, it is still a low stakes season. So I think to disrupt that would not necessarily be a wise idea, but I was more just like, let's be careful about drawing too close a parallel between like what this team could be and what that team was, because you also want this team to be able to set its own tone, right?
100%.
And to make its own history.
Absolutely. Like we talked about it off the top, like what Kyle and DeMar and that team accomplished is probably irreplicable, right? Like you can't go and just like, hey, snap your fingers and have that again. You can have something sort of inspired with similar sort of ideals, right? But it's never going to be the exact same because it's different people and different situation. But I do think like credit to this year's team. I mean, it could have gone real awry considering how much they were losing, how sort of ugly it got there in December in particular, where they just like didn't win a game for a month and they were getting waxed by 30 points every night. I do think this year's team, more than probably any team since maybe the title defense team, maybe the DeMar Kyle teams, kind of has that sort of familial vibe a little bit, right? It's a different thing. It's a very much younger team and it's sort of like a different set of personalities, obviously, but they do seem connected. They do seem to really want to play for each other. They do seem to like each other for the most part. And, I think that's a credit to Darko Rajakovic. Like, I think he's someone who sets like a pretty sort of friendly culture and like a very open vibe. And I don't think there's very little sort of like malice or menace in anything that he does. Like it just feels like, hey, like we're here to like just like be with one another and play basketball, and like they do the family thing too. And again, most teams do that, and it's not always all that apt, but I think in this case we're seeing there is like a connection with this team. Again, it's nothing like the Kyle DeMar thing, because nothing can be like that. But it's encouraging to see that they are kind of striving for that again, because that really is, I mean, if you're looking for competitive advantages when you play in Toronto, in a league where talent acquisition is challenging, the sort of uptick you can get from just like having guys who like being with one another, like that is a genuine advantage in like winning basketball games and building something sustainable. Like it's a lot easier to keep guys around and keep guys happy and avoid the sort of disease of more and all that stuff if everyone's just kind of pretty content with where they're at with their job and the people they're working with. And again, it's still very early days here, and things could go all kinds of wrong because it's a what have you done for me lately league, and things change on the fly. But I do think what they're working on here is it's pretty encouraging, considering the years we spent in the wilderness, where like the Nick Nurse era, great tactical coach, did not seem to care about the team dynamics whatsoever. And I think there was something lost as a result of that. Any parting shots here, Katie, before we wrap up?
Not really. Oh, I did. Now I feel bad because I forget his name, but there was someone who played for the team for one season. Who they got? Who was it? Who they had on camera? I'm sorry to that guy.
Oh God,
because now I can't even. Anyway, I was like, interesting. Okay, sure. I guess the way I can connect that to the whole thing is that even people who maybe that team touched for just a short period of time,
right,
still could still feel the ingrained effects of it, right? And like the farther reaching effects of it.
Totally.
But yeah, if you haven't watched it,
I also can't remember, which is funny.
Sorry, I'm sorry to that dude.
No, yeah,
it's
fine. He's an NBA player. It's all good.
Yeah, it's worth a watch. If you haven't watched it yet, it is worth a watch.
Very good stuff. Shout out to the Open Gym crew, doing wonderful work as always. We're going to leave it there. Thanks so much for rocking with the show. Katie, anything you want to promote for the good people out there?
The newsletter introduced a new segment today in our League at Large section, which is the Friday Scrum. I was like thinking alliteration, but I was like, what's really going to go with a Friday or a Scrum?
Toxic Positivity Friday's got no alliteration, and it's a global phenomenon. So you're good.
It is. Because I looked around the league and everyone's talking about the Jimmy Butler stuff, but aside from the Jimmy Butler stuff, a lot of stuff happened this week. Adam Silver talking about shaving quarters down to 10 minutes.
Rob Manfred ass.
I talked about all-star snubs and whether I believe they're a real thing. Spoiler, I don't. So you can read all that in the newsletter today, and maybe for a few Fridays going forward, which is all the more reason to subscribe.
Hell yeah. It's so nice to be unburdened from caring about all-star stuff. It's great. I could not care.
Grady's going
a lick less. Yeah, it'll be really funny. As I think you mentioned to me earlier this week.
Yeah. I am actually, that is what I'm hoping for. I think that will fix the All-Star game, because the NBA, and I did write about this in our newsletter, but there is no way a team of NBA superstars will let themselves lose to the NBA sophomore team, which I think will be the team that makes it.
Well, they're going to have Wemby, so
out of that pool, just by virtue of Wemby alone. And honestly, pride is sometimes a bigger thing to play for than money. So I want to see what happens.
You just can't be out there having Grady Dick dunk on your head in an all-star game.
And he'll do it.
Those
guys are going to try hard, whereas the other all-stars, no.
No. I don't much look forward to the game itself, but if I have for any reason I will watch it, is for the sort of desire to not get punked by a bunch of 21-year-olds from actual hardened NBA All-Stars. We will leave it there. Thank you so much. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, go to the newsletter. You can go QR code on the screen, link in the description of the podcast. Join the Discord, link in the description of the podcast. We'll be back again on Monday as we talk about the Raptors playing a couple games against the Bulls and the Clippers. Will they be at a 7-game winning streak by Monday? Maybe. Crazy stuff. They'll be have now picked up if they do that. I guess if they win tonight, they'll have doubled their win total in like 3 weeks, which is hilarious. So yeah, fun stuff. We'll be back again on Monday to talk about those two games and send you off into trade deadline week, because that's next week. Crazy. It's going to be busy, I think. Maybe Brandon Ingram? ? We will get into all that coming up next week. Thanks so much for hanging out. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.